What's going on, guys? It's Zach here, bringing you guys another fantasy football video. This is me going over my top 8 Week 7 trade targets. These are guys that I'm looking to buy low on ahead of Week 7. So guys that I think have either underperformed so far, or guys that have maybe come across some potential injuries, or guys that, maybe you can target from struggling teams and help get them on your roster to help push you over the top going forward. So all these guys are guys that I'm certainly looking to involve in trades and guys that I am certainly sending out trade offers for. As well, today I'll be putting out a video going over players I'd be looking to sell high on, guys I'd be looking to move off of, and as always, there is some nuance associated with this as well. Whether or not if you've got a really good record, obviously you can take on some more risk, take on some more injury risk. If you've got a really bad record, it's probably about time to start looking to trade away those injured players. If they're going to be out an extended period of time, you want to make sure that you can start stacking wins and make sure you do at least get into the playoffs. So obviously all of this is going to be very record dependent, very team dependent at this point, but these are sort of just 7 or 8 guys that I really do think you guys should be targeting. As always, if you guys have any specific specific trade questions, feel free to let me know in the comments. I love helping you guys negotiate these trades, sort of see what sort of trades are coming through, and sort of helping you guys get those things moved and made each week. So it's a lot of fun. I always think that trading is my favorite part of fantasy football. I find that it's one of the best ways to make my teams better week over week as well. Whether or not you're 1-5 or 1-4 at this point, 1-5 at this point, or maybe you're 4-2, 5-1. There's a lot that can change just with one single trade. If you're really struggling, you make the right trade, you can certainly turn your entire season around. And if you're at a really good spot and you get stagnant and don't make any trades, you can certainly very easily have a team that might be worse than you right now, but they could easily pass you down the road. So it's important to stay active. Make sure your teams get better and better throughout the course of the season. And trading is one of the most fun and best ways to do that. So yeah, with that, let's just get into the first player here. So my first buy low this week, it's going to be David Montgomery, and you guys know how much I love David Montgomery. I've got him on like 5 of the 7 teams I'm managing this year, so super excited about how well he's performed so far. And obviously we did hit a bit of a speed bump this week. He left the game with a rib injury. He's got like a bruised rib, so he's not going to miss extended time, but their head coach Dan Campbell did come out and say that he's going to miss a little bit. I would expect him to miss this week and then the following week because they've got the week 9 bye. So once you get him back in week 10, you should have a top 10 running back going forward. He's been a top 10 running back so far in the season. He continues to operate as the workhorse running back in this backfield, and the Lions are just a really good offense. They've scored the second most points in the entire NFL so far this season. There are a ton of scoring opportunities for David Montgomery coming, and he's a guy that they do utilize near the goal line a ton, and they're going to give him 20-plus touches a week. Head coach Dan Campbell came out last week and just raved about how much he loves David Montgomery and how he was brought in to be the workhorse in this backfield. He really is going to be a guy that's going to be a rock star for you guys. And I think that if you've got the fantasy manager in your league that has Montgomery, if he's 2-4 or even 3-3 or worse, definitely go out there and kick the tires on David Montgomery. I've got one 3-3 team with David Montgomery. I'm not looking to trade him, but if someone gave me a lot, I would certainly be willing to do so. Just because, if you're 3-3, you are sort of on the balance in terms of whether or not you're going to make the playoffs. And if you're going to miss a player for the next 3 weeks, it could certainly put you in a bind. So there are a lot of running back needy teams out there. Maybe you have an extra running back, like a lower end running back too, that you could trade and get David Montgomery because that manager needs to start stacking some wins now. I think you could certainly take advantage of that and really get David Montgomery on your roster, especially if you're 4-2, 5-1, or 6-0. It's definitely a guy that I'd be targeting, a guy that should be a rock star for you guys down the stretch. Another player I'd be looking to target this week is going to be Devonte Adams. He's coming off of back-to-back really brutal weeks, and I think a lot of it can be associated with this shoulder injury. He just doesn't look like himself right now. They're effectively using him as a decoy. We also know this last week they played the New England Patriots, and Bill Belichick has a very long list of players that he sort of scripted out of games. He's got a knack for really just isolating the main threat in an offense and trying to remove them from the game. And I think that's really what they did with Devonte Adams. You saw a couple of plays this week where they had the safety crash down on Devonte Adams, and they allowed that rookie wide receiver, I forget his name, but he had a couple of deep plays just because they were focused so much on Devonte Adams. And the Raiders did a good job sort of scheming around how the Patriots were attacking them. But going forward, I think there's going to be a lot more opportunity for Devonte Adams. He is still an alpha wide receiver in the NFL. He's one of the best wide receivers in the NFL right now, and people really are panicking about him. I think that I've seen trades where like Deebo Samuel got traded for Devonte Adams, stuff like that. That's just way too cheap right now. I think Devonte Adams definitely should be a guy that you kick the tires on. And again, it's another player that the manager that has him is struggling, which they probably are because he has really only had like one great week so far this season. It's going to put you in a bad spot where if you're 1-5, 2-4 with Devonte Adams, you don't want to wait around for when that health really does kick in, because it's sort of just going to happen where eventually Devonte Adams will be healthy and you'll see a really great performance out of him. And because he's going to keep playing every single week, we're not really going to know exactly when that's going to happen. On top of that, the quarterback is banged up. We know Jimmy Garoppolo left the game last week with a back injury. His status is uncertain going forward, but I'd expect we see Brian Hoyer this week. And Brian Hoyer is a competent backup NFL quarterback. He can do enough, make this offense work. And they play the Chicago Bears next week. It's a really plus matchup. I think it could easily be the week that Devonte Adams bounce back. And when he's healthy and the Raiders are losing games, which they will do going forward, they've obviously won each of the last 2 weeks against offenses that really just can't move the ball. So the Raiders weren't really required to score a lot of points to win these games. When they play some teams that are actually going to put up some points against them, which isn't that hard to do against this bad Raiders defense, he's going to be a top 10 wide receiver, and he's not that expensive for you guys right now. So he needs to be targeted, and especially if the manager in your league is in win now mode, because I think it could be maybe 1 or 2 more weeks before we see him really regain that dominance that we saw earlier on in the season. But when it happens, you're going to be really glad he's on your roster, and I don't think he's going to be any cheaper than he is right now. Next, we've got another wide receiver who's actually made this list before, and I just got to really hammer it home again. T. Higgins, he really predictably went out and put up a dud in Week 6. He only had 2 catches for 20 yards. He had 4 targets, and he was effectively used as a decoy in this game. He only ran a route on about 50% of the dropbacks this week. That's down from about a 96% average prior to his injury. He is very clearly the number 2 wide receiver in this offense, and we know how talented T. Higgins is. He's been an elite athlete, an elite performer in fantasy before, and he will be after this injury resolves itself. They've got their bye in Week 7, which is actually really conveniently timed because it gives him that extra week to heal up. I'd expect him to be about as close to 100% as possible come Week 8. And that's going to be great because Joe Burrow himself should be back to about full health as well. So after Week 7, you're probably looking at T. Higgins being right back to the guy that you drafted him to be, being that like low-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2. And that's going to be a really valuable asset for your fantasy roster. And I don't think he costs you nearly that right now. He's obviously been extremely disappointing outside of the 1 Week 2 performance where he was really good. He's a guy that obviously the fantasy manager with him on their team is probably struggling at this point because of how much he's let them down so far, and they're probably in win now mode. They probably are 2-4, 3-3, maybe 1-5 potentially. And if they're at that record, they do need to get a win right now. And you can really sell it as, hey, T. Higgins is on bye right now, and you need to win this week. So I'll give you a lower tier wide receiver 2, maybe someone a little bit worse, and get T. Higgins from you, and he's going to be a guy that's going to really help you down the stretch. So they've got a really great 6-week stretch. The last 3 weeks of the regular season for fantasy, and the 3 weeks into it. Got the best 6-week schedule you can possibly imagine there. So he's going to be a monster of that 6-week stretch. He'll help get you in the playoffs and help take you over the top once those playoffs start. So definitely go target T. Higgins. He's not going to be all that expensive because of how disappointing he's been, and we know what the ceiling is. So he's definitely someone that you want to have on your roster. Next, we've got another running back on this list, and that's going to be Saquon Barkley. He had 29 opportunities in Week 6, which is extremely positive because we were a little bit worried, obviously, coming off of that high ankle sprain that potentially he'd be limited, but he very clearly wasn't. He's very clearly healthy, and he looked relatively good. He had a couple of big runs. He didn't look like 100% of himself, but he should be only better going forward as he gets healthier and healthier, and he was clearly healthy enough that they were comfortable giving him that workload, so that is really exciting so far for Saquon Barkley. Andrew Thomas, their all-pro left tackle, should return soon, hopefully as soon as this week, and that's going to give this offensive line a huge boost. And that's a really big issue for them because without him, they aren't really able to throw the ball down the field. They don't get any pass protection, and they can't really generate quality pass blocking lanes or run blocking lanes either. So Andrew Thomas coming back is going to do great things for this entire offense. We should see more scoring opportunities for Saquon Barkley. And on top of that, Daniel Jones should be back relatively soon. I don't know if he's a huge upgrade over Tyrod Taylor. I think he's probably a little bit better, but it should enable a little bit more scoring opportunity in general for this offense. So things should look up for Saquon there. And Saquon really is just a top 10 running back the rest of the season, probably a top 5 guy. And he's never going to be cheaper than he is right now after it was a disappointing output in Week 6, having not really performed at a high level since that Week 2 matchup against the Cardinals. So even though he did have those 29 touches, he only ended up with like 11.8 fantasy points just because he obviously didn't score. And when you don't score a touchdown and don't catch that many passes, I believe he had 4 receptions in this one, it just doesn't set you up for being a huge fantasy performer. But they played a tough Bills defense. They'll be in some games they'll be able to score a lot more. They've got a really great matchup this week against the Commanders. I bet Saquon Barkley finds the end zone in this one, probably ends up with over 100 total yards, and probably slams the door shut in any sort of buy low window. So if you want to get Saquon Barkley on your roster, now's probably the best time to do that. So I'd definitely kick the tires there. Next, we've got the first of 2 tight ends I'll highlight, and it's going to be TJ Hockenson. The Vikings won this last game in Week 6 fairly easily against the Bears, led to Kirk Cousins only throwing the ball 31 times. Hockenson, out of those 31 pass attempts, still got 8 targets, so a 27% target share, and he didn't score a touchdown, so he ended up with 6 receptions for 50 yards. That is by no means special, but at a tight end position, you'll absolutely take that. He's actually been really consistent so far this year, and he honestly has got a shot to lead the NFL in targets at the tight end position, and he's got really beneficial matchups down the stretch. The last 2 weeks of the fantasy regular season, he will face the Broncos and the Bears, 2 defenses who give up a ton of points to the opposing fantasy tight ends, and that's going to be a really great thing to help get you over the top and get you into the playoffs. And Hockenson is probably the tight end 2 the rest of the season. Obviously, Travis Kelce's got that tight end 1 on lock, but while Justin Jefferson's out, T.J. Hockenson is very clearly the number 1 target in this offense. No other pass catcher saw more than 5 targets in week 6, so Hockenson's very clearly the number 1 option. They've got a sort of tough matchup against the San Francisco 49ers in week 7, but they should be trailing in that one, so we should need to see a little bit more passing volume out of Kirk Cousins. Maybe that helps T.J. Hockenson maybe get in the end zone as well. And he's just going to be an elite fantasy asset. He's a tight end that obviously is a difference maker and you don't have to worry about. And I don't think he's going to be any cheaper than he was right now. Maybe the manager is going to be worried that, oh, this Vikings offense just doesn't look like itself without Justin Jefferson. Maybe they'll think the scoring opportunity is going to go down. And maybe that's a little bit true, but Hockenson's going to see such a huge share of this offense that I definitely want to get him on my roster. So if you don't have him and you don't have either Andrews, Laporta, or Kelsey, I'd probably kick the tires on Hockenson and just see how much it's going to cost you to get him. And next, we've got the second tight end I'm going to talk about here, and that's going to be Mark Andrews. He just hasn't quite delivered in his preseason draft capital. He's been fine, but just not great. And obviously, I think that it's got a lot of fantasy managers really frustrated. They either spent a late second or early third round pick on him, depending upon when they drafted. And that obviously isn't leading to the fantasy success that they wanted it to. They want some of those big blow up performances. And outside of week 2, where he scored 2 touchdowns, he really hasn't delivered a high end performance. But he hasn't been horrible either. Something I want to highlight too is Lamar Jackson only has 5 passing touchdowns for the first 6 weeks. He averages about 1.7 passing touchdowns per game throughout his career, so he should have, in general, about 10 passing touchdowns at this point. And if that's the case, then Andrews is going to score a lot more often going forward. We're going to see a lot more passing touchdowns out of Lamar Jackson, and that should lead to a lot more scoring opportunities for Andrews. On top of that, the matchups are just really great for Mark Andrews. They play Detroit, Seattle, Arizona, Cleveland. That's not a great matchup, and then the Bengals and Chargers. So 5 of their next 6 matchups are going to be against teams that are going to score the ball quite a bit more, really require the Ravens to score more on their own end, and also their defense that you can certainly exploit. So I think the next 6 weeks is going to be a really great stretch for Mark Andrews. You'll probably see him score 4 or 5 touchdowns over that stretch, maybe 3, but he's going to score a lot more going forward. He's going to be a locked-in top 3, top 4 tight end the rest of the season, and I don't think he's necessarily lived up to the hype that people drafted him to be at this point. So I think you can trade for him at this point and probably get a pretty good value. So see how much he costs, and definitely worth just sort of seeing what the fantasy manager wants for him. Next, we've got another Raven, first quarterback on this list, and that's going to be Lamar Jackson. And for the same reason I talked about with Mark Andrews, regression is coming for Lamar Jackson. Like I said earlier, he should be throwing for a lot more passing touchdowns going forward. He only has 5 so far this season. I'd expect that to regress to the mean a little bit for him. And on top of that, the Ravens do have yet to face an opposing offense that actually put up a respectable score on this Ravens defense. They just really haven't played any very good offenses to this point. They haven't had to score many points so far to win games. The highest scoring opponent they've had so far was the Bengals, who put up 24 points against them. And a lot of those, if you remember that game, I believe it was in week 3, a lot of those points came in garbage time. And it really wasn't a situation where the Bengals actually put up many points. So the Ravens haven't found themselves in a situation where they're trying to match the opposing team yet. And if you look at those 6 games they've got coming up, you've got Cleveland, Seattle, Arizona, Cincinnati, Los Angeles. A lot of teams that are going to be able to put up a lot of points in this team. So they're definitely going to be several matchups going forward that should allow Lamar to need to score a lot more. I forgot to mention the Lions, their matchup this week. So there should be a lot of points that get scored against them going forward, and that's going to mean that Lamar is going to have to match that. He's certainly capable. He's obviously got the rushing floor as well. So I think he's probably going to be a top 5 quarterback the rest of the season. And I don't really think he's going to cost you that right now. I think I would maybe prefer him to Patrick Mahomes the rest of the season, just because of Patrick Mahomes being someone that obviously is dealing with how good his defense is playing, and obviously Lamar offers a lot more rushing ability. So I think you can get Lamar Jackson. I think he's going to be a really quality option for you guys the rest of the season, and it's obviously not lived up to the hype that you thought Todd Monken in this offense would live up to, but they've still been okay, and I think better days are ahead for them as they get more acclimated to this new system and actually have to score some points to win games. And last, but certainly not least, one more wide receiver that I'd be looking to buy low on is going to be Puka Ngata. Puka Ngata still had a 31% target share in week 6, and I think a lot of people are just looking at the final box score and saying, oh, he didn't score very many fantasy points, it must be over. Cooper Kupp came in, he stole the job back, and Cooper Kupp is very clearly the wide receiver 1 in this offense. And while that may be true, Cooper Kupp is very clearly the wide receiver 1 in this offense. I think there's plenty of room for both these guys to eat. There isn't really another wide pass catcher in this offense that's seen a very noticeable target share. Higbee, Tutu Atwell, the running backs, they're not getting very many targets at this point. So Puka Ngata is going to see a very high target share in what should be a really pass-heavy offense going forward. We know he's talented with how well he's performed so far this season, and he also dropped a touchdown in the first half of this last game. If he catches that touchdown, the train's still rolling. Everyone's super excited about Puka Ngata still, and even after that first half drop, the Rams leaned to the running game in the second half. I believe Kyren Williams had like 154 rushing yards in just the second half. So the Rams really just didn't need to throw the ball the second half. They won the game really easily, and the Cardinals really couldn't keep up. So this wasn't a very good game environment for Puka Ngata to put up a really high end performance. And they're going to need to throw the ball a lot more going forward. They play the Steelers this next week, who are a defense that can absolutely be beat through the air. They also are a pretty relatively decent run defense. And on top of that, Kyren Williams and Ronnie Rivers got banged up. They're not going to play in this one, so the Rams are going to have to lean on Zach Evans and Royce Freeman. I believe they signed Myles Gaskins off the Vikings practice squad as well. So it's just a really gross situation for their backfield, and they're going to have to air it out if they want to win games. They should have a lot of success doing that against the Steelers' pass defense. It's been really bad so far. So Puka is like a mid-tiered, maybe even high-end wide receiver 2 for me the rest of the season, and I really don't think he's going to cost you that right now. He's been great so far. He's very clearly a talented wide receiver. Stafford likes him. This is a Rams offense that's going to throw the ball quite a bit. So I think Puka can be had for relatively cheap right now, because I think a lot of people sort of think the show's over, the party's over, and it's just not going to continue. But I really do think it's going to. I think he's an elite player, and he should be an elite role the rest of the season, so I want to get Puka on my roster if I can. So that'll do it for these 8 players that I've been looking to buy low on ahead of week 7. Up next, or the same video that'll come out today, will be the 7 players, or some players that I'm looking to sell high on ahead of week 7 as well. So as always, if you guys haven't seen that video, please do just subscribe to the channel. Make sure you get access to that. Make sure you guys watch both these videos. And if you have any specific trade questions, as always, you guys can ask me in the comments. I love interacting with you guys, helping you guys make those trades. And it's a lot of fun for me, and it helps me sort of gauge how things are playing out in the most fantasy leagues as well. So it's a lot of fun. I really do appreciate it. On top of that, if you guys haven't subscribed to the channel already and you made it this far into the video, please do just take the time to subscribe to this video. It really helps me just know the channel is growing. I'm at like 890 subscribers right now, and I'd love to hit 1,000 by the end of the NFL seasons. We need about 10 per week, so if you're one of the many people who watch these videos that just hasn't subscribed yet, please do that. It'll help make sure you don't miss any videos going forward. Really help me be here all season long to help you guys dominate your league and hopefully help you guys get some fantasy championships. So really appreciate all the support. As always, please do give the video a thumbs up if you haven't already, and I'll catch you next time. Thank you guys for watching. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, check out these other videos here if you haven't. If you want more content, please feel free to follow me on Twitter at RealSteelFFB. I'll be more active on there as the season goes on. Thanks. Catch you later.